الله أكبر الله أكبر.
Assalamu alaikum and welcome to the Islamic Center at New York University podcast, coming to you straight from the heart of New York City. We're building an amazing Muslim community here at ICNYU where everyone is welcomed and respected no matter where you're from or where you're at. This is the place to be. So open your ears and your heart and come along with us on another life-changing journey. Bismillah.
Bismillah. Bismillah walhamdulillah wassalatu wassalam ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala. So we've been looking at the Book of Assistance, which is a text on spirituality written by Imam Al-Haddad rahimahullah. And for those who it's your first time joining us, essentially creates a roadmap for one who is looking to traverse a spiritual path in these very easily digestible chapters. Our tradition doesn't separate religion, ethics, and spirituality from one another, but sees them as necessary components that synergize all under the banner of Islam. And we've been looking at this text, going piece by piece through each chapter in a little bit more detailed discussion. And so today we're going to look at the third chapter, which this author translates as vigilance. And in Arabic, the term is muraqabah. So the first chapter was on yaqeen, or certitude, but that was a certitude rooted in faith, deep conviction, deep faith, right? The way that if you came into this room, you have faith that these lights would turn on, right? When you go into your house and you turn the faucet, water is going to come out of it, inshallah, right? The way you believe the lights will turn on, the way you hit the switch, that's the way yaqeen is rooted in believing in Allah in a similar capacity. And then niyyah, intention, was the second chapter, that once you've outlined the destination that is yaqeen, certitude, that niyyah, that intention, is essentially a necessary component that you're affirming for yourself, that you know why you're doing what you're doing before you actually set out to do it. Right? That the journey commences with conscious, aware, strategic kind of thoughts and not just default settings and going instinctively or with spontaneity alone. And now this third chapter is on muraqabah, and it's going to have to deal a lot with the heart, right? Vigilance in and of itself is not a word that we're not familiar with necessarily, but in its deepest root, this is what muraqabah is. To be in a place where you essentially are watching over your heart so that your heart watches over you. And you're traversing now on this journey with a recognition that there's some element of vigilance to it. And the chapter in and of itself will define it a little bit more. And so if people want to pull up the text, you can just Google Book of Assistance PDF and it'll come up on vigilance. And as we get into this, what you'd have to buy into for this to really resonate is the notion that your heart is actually a primary organ of cognition within you. That it's not just the brain that you have, or what we associate intellect to be rooted in primarily our minds, but what our tradition bases our entire psychology of the self off of is not a mind that is meant to be sovereign, but a heart that's meant to be sovereign. And so much of what the Quran talks about, and what the Hadith speaks about, are both recognitions of what are elements that yield, as well as signs of a healthy, awake heart, as well as signs of a hard heart, a dead heart, a sick heart. May Allah protect us from these things. It's not going to be easy to be able to assess if self-deprecation is the mode. And assessment is also not going to be easy if you're not fundamentally, subjectively buying into the idea that this thing exists inside of me that is my spiritual heart, and it has full capacity to be what determines and synthesizes information as I take it in through all of my organs of sensory perception. If you don't buy into it, it's just lip service. And that can't be something that you believe because somebody told you to believe it, but you fundamentally have to think about this thing that is within you. Our teachers tell us that your physical heart and your spiritual heart, they're essentially kind of intertwined. So the place of your physical heart is also where in your being resides your spiritual heart. So I want you to think now, just talk to the persons around you as we kind of get into this. How can you tell from the way that you have been built, the way that you've been constructed, that your heart is an important part of you? Does that make sense? Does the question make sense? Just reflecting on you as an individual being. The way that Allah made you, how can you tell that the heart is something that actually is important? As you can turn to the persons next to you, ideally just in pairs. When I say this, there's always a group that's got like 7 people in it, right? So pairs is just 2, in case you didn't know, so that everybody's talking. If you need to, you can have maybe 3 people, but in a pair. How can you tell just by looking at yourself, the way that you have been built, that your heart is something that's important? Does the question make sense? Okay, so let's discuss and then we'll come back and kind of talk about it.
Kind of connects you all together. Also, always two perspectives because sincerely you can difficult to distinguish between the future of your friends and the future of your friends. Those are two parts of the knocks out a few seconds. The same thing is in most times when you have something in your system that is rooted in your body, it influences even like something just drops and you want to do it, you see that oh, maybe you want to see it. I know something. It's just like God has accepted because more of a belief system. You believe that okay, anybody can do this with something that anything you can do that okay, people will just do it. Those are the things where you see all this
yes, right, so they just go off of what their practice
Okay, so what are some of the things that we talked about? How can you tell just by looking at yourself that the way you are made, that your heart is actually something important? Do you get what I mean? Yeah.
Well, the way I was kind of describing it is that, well, he made a really good point about how, for example, the heart is like protected no matter what by, like, for example, your rib cage or any sort of. I was saying about how one of the things that kind of gets me through like day to day, no matter how I'm feeling, is that no matter what, like I'm a biochem major, so like I learned some of these things too, but it was like no matter what is going on with you physically, spiritually, emotionally, whatever, your body is literally fighting to keep you alive, no matter what it's doing. It's just a process to keep you moving. So, and I was also talking about how either it's, for example, myself or someone who I'm talking to, or just someone you could just see from a distance, if there's always this notion that someone is despiritualized, either it's because of work or personal problems or etc., there's always some sort of thing around someone's heart, if that makes any sense. Like you could just feel it, either it's you or someone else. Like it's like you kind of mentioned, there's a spirituality and the actual physical entities of the heart are basically intertwined. If I were to feel down, like emotionally, but if I were to check myself, they would say, oh, your heart's fine, it's pumping, everything's good, but there's still something that you just feel it from there. If that makes any sense.
Makes a lot of sense, yeah. And let's you said about protection with your rib cage and stuff. What did you mean by that?
Just speaking from an anatomical perspective, the fact that other parts of your body have been formed to protect your heart, right? Like part of the role of the rib cage is to protect the heart. And thinking about other aspects of the body that are similarly important, like you have your throat, but it's not really being protected. Even though you lost your throat, you'd probably die. But the fact that the heart is being more protected says that it has a role that's even more important than just your physical well-being.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then you think about the parts to your body in a spiritual sense that are not super protected also, that give indication hierarchically as well, right? The stomach, the sexual organs, they are not protected the way the heart is protected. And that's something that you want to reflect upon within yourself. Allah put your most precious piece of you behind literally like a barrier that it's not easy to just break into. Do you know what I mean? What else did we talk about in your groups? How can you tell just by the way you are built that your heart is something that's important? Yeah.
I think you've mentioned before that just the brain is the highest, and then the heart in us physically, and then your stomach and sexual organs. So the things that are the least important, sort of, the lower pleasures are lower in you for a reason. Maybe the things that you should be thinking about the most are the ones that are highest in you.
Yeah, you have like a physical self that has a literal higher hemisphere and a lower hemisphere, right? What else? Yeah.
We talked a bit about how every part of your body is essentially connected back to the heart because it circulates the blood through your whole body, and then it comes right back to the heart. So it has that sort of connectivity to your whole being.
Yeah, and this thing is beautiful, the way that it functions. My father's a cardiologist, may Allah grant him shifa, and my uncle is a cardiologist. A lot of my family's doctor. I'm not a doctor. I am kind of the unfortunate child in the family that was not a doctor. My sister and brother are also not doctors, but they don't do what I do for a living. Inshallah. No, my parents are very proud of me, alhamdulillah. But think about it, for those of you who have had any kind of interaction with an anatomy class, like the way just the heart fundamentally functions, and how in minutes it's pumping through gallons of blood to the rest of your body, how over the course of your entire existence is going to beat billions of times. It functions in and of itself independent of the establishment of a nervous system. It is in a place where it has its own capacity of consciousness and intellect. And that's just how it functions physiologically speaking. It doesn't need the brain to get going. You see? And there's so much that you can just think about from within yourself that can give you an insight that the way that Allah created you was to point your awareness to the fact that this is something that's really, really important. This is something that is not meant to be just kind of taken lightly or gloss over. Does that make sense? Did anybody else talk about something different in terms of just the way we're built and how that can give us insight into the importance of this thing? Yeah.
We also talked about how as a child you feel more with your heart rather than think with your brain, and as we get older we strive to return to that pure childlike state.
Yeah. Your spiritual heart has different layers to it. The outermost layer is called the sadr. Right? This is where shaitan has capacity to whisper to you. Right? Fi sudur nas, it says. May Allah protect us from the waswasa of shaitan. You then have the next layer that's called the qalb, the spiritual heart. You have a third layer that's called the fu'ad. This is the seat of emotions within an individual. Right? In the Quran, you have the example of the story of Musa alayhi salam, when his mother puts him into the river and the anxiety and distress she feels. It's rooted in her fu'ad. And then you have the innermost part to it that's called the lub. Right? And the way the lub is likened to the heart is the way that the Kaaba is likened to the city of Mecca. You know, the way that your eye is essentially relates to its innermost part of its pupil. Right? These are parts to your heart. Knowing the terms, again, are not going to make a difference if you don't fundamentally believe that inside of you there is this actual piece of flesh that the Prophet ﷺ has said in the hadith, "Ala wa inna fil jasadi mudghatan idha saluhat saluha jasadu kullu wa idha fasadat fasada jasadu kullu ala wa hiya al-qalb," that indeed in your jasad there is a mudgha, a morsel of flesh. If it is good, the entire being will be good. If it is not good, the entire being will not be good. Indeed, it is your heart. You have to think about how your heart actually has capacity to think. And it has capacity to be the means through which you see and you are aware and you're vigilant. And if it has the capacity to do that, but that's not the default, that it then has also the ability to not do those things that it's supposed to do, right? You can use parts of your body in ways that you're not supposed to. You know what I mean? We're not supposed to sit so much, right? Most of us in this room, we sit a lot more than we're supposed to. It impacts our physical wellness and our physical health. May Allah make it easy for us, right? I probably should not be sitting like this right now. Who sits with one foot underneath one leg when they're sitting on a chair? I don't know. There's likely things that we do constantly that are not necessarily very aware or conscious. The way that we sleep is probably not the most sensible. The absence of exercise, the food that we put into our body. There's so much that demonstrates what people are really crazy. You know, the largest number of things that I see in common from people whose self-care is terrible is just like poor sleeping habits. You just don't sleep right, or sleep well, or sleep enough. You stay up doing things that just don't make any sense as to why couldn't you go to sleep and just do those things in the morning? Do you know what I mean? But all of it gives us an insight now into what's the most apparent parts of us, which is our external physical, let alone what's happening to us inwardly physically in terms of consequences from these behaviors, right? Do you really know what you are doing to your physical heart based off of the food that you eat or the foods that you choose not to eat? Do you really know when you smoke that thing that you smoke, what it's doing to your lungs and what it's doing to your body? And if the awareness of the physicality of it is something that is non-existent, which again is not like a jab at anybody, you just got to think, do you really pay attention to how your body functions? How often are you then really thinking about what this thing is that's existing on a metaphysical level? Let alone letting it be something that you are particularly engaged in spiritual exercise around, to have it be what is the most prevalent, authoritative part to your inner self. Does that make sense? And so I want you to take a minute. Do you guys want to move up again? Sorry. So people don't have to pray in the corridor. You can come close. There's a lot of room in here. I want you to just individually now think to yourself, right? And this is what muraqabah in large part is. Gaining that attentiveness necessitates yielding to ideas that in our spiritual tradition are built in. Ritualistic exercise around contemplation. This is what muraqabah is. You increase focus. You increase in a state of vigilance. I just want you to think within yourself, do you believe, right? Do I, Khalid, actually believe that my heart is what is supposed to be in control of the rest of me? You get what I'm saying? Do I think my heart is the most important part of me? And then how do you know whether the answer to that is yes or no? I just want you to think within yourself for a minute. Because you can have somebody just throw hadith and Quran at you. At some point, it's got to be, I'm really just praying with my body. I'm not praying with my heart. I'm only reading with my eyes. I'm not reading through my heart. I'm not making decisions through my heart. I'm making them at the expense of my heart. I don't really care about the impact of my actions on somebody else's heart. Right? If I can't see my own heart as something of value, how am I going to really appreciate those that are around me at that level? And then consequentially, not necessarily thinking about the impact that my behavior, the absence thereof, can have. And not just in terms of negatives, but also positives. It's easier for me to then say, I don't have to be the one to say salam to that person. Somebody else will. Maybe their heart needs for you to be the one that invokes Allah to descend peace upon them. So just think for a minute. Do you believe that your heart is actually important? As important as the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam taught you to believe that it was important. As important as the way that Allah wanted you to know it was important, just based off of the way He built you. And how do you know that? Let's just think within ourselves for a minute, and then we'll come back. Okay. How was that? In terms of just your own inward reflection. You don't have to say what you thought about, or you can if you want to. But just the process of answering that question within oneself. What was that like for you? Yeah.
No question.
Oh no, I asked you a question.
Okay. The process was nice. I think we don't take the time to just sit and be silent and think about ourselves and how we live our lives and what's important to us at the end of the day. So
Yep.
Thank you for that. Can I ask my question now?
Yeah, no, go for it. Sorry, I was being obnoxious. Yeah.
I think a lot of people who grew up with like an Islamic kind of mindset, their automatic is to live with their heart like on their sleeve, as they say. So most of your decisions are about wanting everyone else to feel okay and trying to keep your heart pure and being like a martyr almost within your own life and within the parameters of, you know, your own martyrdom. But as I've grown older, I've realized I can't live that way because it is such an exhausting life. And I think like being reminded to go back to that is a little scary. Because of the exhaustion, obviously, but also because I'm sure there's some kind of middle ground that I'm missing.
Can you flesh that out a little more?
Sure, sorry.
That's okay.
Like, you know, Arab moms, for instance, how they anticipate like your needs before you even realize you need something. I grew up being like that, and to constantly be thinking about everyone else and how they feel and trying to be the best version of yourself and make sure everyone else is feeling okay makes you forget yourself often. But we're God's creatures as well, so of course part of, I'm guessing, having a full heart is, or a happy, healthy heart, is taking care of others and ourselves, but that's a difficult balance to strike, like within the Islamic mindset of putting other people first. Does that make sense? It's
Yeah.
kind of hard to put into words this idea.
No, it's really, it makes a lot of sense. Is that how, does anybody else think that that's what we're supposed to do religiously speaking?
I don't think it's what we're supposed to do. I think that's what
Or is that what people
I
were
was
brought
taught.
up with?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah?
Culturally.
I that's what I thought.
Oh,
Go ahead.
well, it's just like a lot of Arab moms, like they taught us like, oh, you have to learn how to cook and you have to learn how to do these things for your future husband, or they will leave you or something like that.
Whoa.
Like, culturally. Like, unfortunately, like, for example, I grew up like that, and that kind of, like, I'm just adding what she's saying.
That doesn't sound like the same thing. My mom wasn't Arab, so I don't know, but yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, it's more like, I can relate to what she said, because it's more like, it's a feel of guilt when you think about yourself before thinking about others. It somehow translates somehow to that. And at some point you realize, okay, where am I in all of that? So, but once you feel that, you feel like, okay, but I have to take care of other people. I need, yeah, somehow you cannot do it because you feel guilty that you're doing it somehow.
Yeah.
So it's
Go ahead.
And just adding on to that, I feel like it's more so for women. I think it's like we're slightly deviating from the topic here, but like for us the pressure is more like my whole being is to serve my brother, my father, my future husband, and that's what we've been conditioned ever since we were born. And that like you feel guilty and like you know this is not right, but that's what expected of you, that's what your parents expect of you, that's what everybody else expects of you, and it just
Unfortunately, we use that. It's not religiously, that's not right, and we all know that. But unfortunately, like our parents, they utilize Islam to guilt trip us a lot more. If that makes sense.
Yeah, and I'm sorry about that. And this is what this, as a spiritual exercise, is about. Muraqabah in and of itself is an opportunity to also recognize like what comes up for us, right? So when you engage in meditative, contemplative practice, the idea is not to necessarily name it right away, but things are going to arise, right? They're going to come up, and you're going to have to sit with them and say, where did that come from? What is that rooted in? Fundamentally, Islam as a tradition does not negate the idea of loving yourself. You have foundational hadith, for example, that say things to the effect of, you will not enter paradise until you believe, and you will not believe until you love for your brother what you love for yourself. In order to love something for your brother that you love for yourself, you also have to love something for yourself. Does that make sense? Yeah. Which means that you have to love things for yourself. You love yourself. Do you get what I'm saying? right? And it's hard because when there's not opportunity to be affirmed or to have kind of real healthy community or healthy familial relations, and then you have it not in a vacuum but in a society that overemphasizes the external, the physical, even when you're in a place of religion, it becomes quite often about forms and do's and don'ts and black and white, right and wrong alone. There's not necessarily that inner part to it that recognizes individuals as whole beings. It's hard to love yourself when the world keeps reminding you that you're a mistake, or that you're not ever good enough, and that you have a pursuit of perfection that is not rooted in what Allah is asking you to work towards, but societally that now confines and constricts. Then you're not necessarily in a place where the heart has the opportunity to be in a place of wakefulness. Doubts will come in. The Prophet ﷺ had doubts. He had a lot of doubts. He had doubts from the first day of revelation. He thought he lost his mind. What he had was also people around him that were affirming. He had family members that were helpful and family members that were not helpful. A wakeful heart allows for us to distinguish between the two. He could understand individuals who were conditional in their support and allyship and people who were actually very solidified. He knew how to recognize people and place them where they were intended to be. Why is Khalid ibn Walid in the battlefield the ways that he is, but the other senior companions are following him in battle, right? The opportunity for this is rooted in everything that we're saying and so much more that people of different cultural backgrounds could likely relate in some ways, or also could say, well, my Desi parents did this, or, my West African parents did this, or, my non-Muslim parents are like this, right? It becomes hard to move through certain things, and that vigilance is important because what Imam al-Haddad is going to say to us in this chapter is there's going to be inward obstacles. There's going to be things that have taken root in your heart. Intention precedes this as a chapter because the Prophet teaches us, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that the home of intention is the heart. And so if you're not in a place where you have vigilance over it, it's not going to necessarily also have vigilance over you. But it's not the only part of you. You do have a body. You do have a nafs, a lower self. You do have the aql, intellect. You have irada, sheer will and determination. You have the ruh, the spirit, the soul. You have so much that makes you what you are, the same way parts of your body that you don't ever engage or really think about. I don't ever think about my eyebrows, right? Maybe some of you do. I was talking to my son the other day, and I don't know what we were talking about, but I was trying to convince him to give me the small toe off of his foot. And he said, Baba, what's wrong with you? And I said, what do you use it? I was like, tell me why it's important. And he said, it's my foot, Baba. But I said, you can't tell me what you use it for. And he said, no, I don't know why I want it, And I was like, it's okay, keep your foot. I'm not taking your toe, relax. But the same way you likely don't know or really think about the nails that cover your fingers, the actual skin that subhanAllah regenerates on its own once it's cut and breaks open on your body, bones that can just heal themselves, which is crazy if you think about it. If you're not thinking about your heart, it doesn't mean that it just functions on its own, the way your breathing happens naturally. It's one of those things that if you don't pay attention to it, you don't pay attention to the pain that exists, the irreconciled emotion, the stresses, the traumas, if you don't pay attention to the impact and effect that you have to, at this juncture in your spiritual journey, be comfortable with the fact that everybody does things that they're not supposed to. May Allah protect us from it. But its consequence creates now darkness around the heart. This is in the hadith. You commit haram, then it creates darkness in your heart. It's going to impact the heart. You lie, you gossip, you backbite, you curse, you cheat. It's going to do things fundamentally. And these things in combination now start to impact yourself, but it also bears impact on you when somebody else doesn't deal with the garbage that's going on inside of them, they're still passing it on to you, right? And then somebody at some level has to wake up and say, I'm not going to pass this on to anybody else. It's going to take some time and I'm going to work on my inside, but I'm going to work on it nonetheless. And the heart can be the seat of decision making. It can be what is sovereign, or it can be neglected. I'm not telling you that you should start paying attention to the pinky toes on your feet, but subhanAllah, like you should, because it would throw off your balance, your walking. If you didn't have just this little thing that was jutting out the side of your feet, you know what I'm saying? And so this is now like the main thing that is within you. You can talk to doctor. My dad's a doctor, right? He's a cardiologist. I don't know if any of you are doctors or grew up around doctors. Anybody a doctor? You're a doctor? Yeah, great. There's one doctor in this room? You're a doctor? Yeah, you don't have to be embarrassed. Be a doctor. Is anybody studying to be a doctor? You're lying. There's no way. You are? Yeah? What is going on? Anybody have family members that are doctors? All right, okay. I was about to have an existential crisis in a room full of Muslims. There's 2 doctors. Oh, I could hear my dad talking on the phone. My dad was like a different kind of doctor. He was a good doctor because he was a good person, mashallah. When he had a stroke about 6-7 years ago, I went to my hometown. Every place I would go around the hospital, people of all backgrounds, races, cultures, religions, they'd ask me, how is my dad, right? They'd first say to me, you look familiar. And my ego would kick in. I'd be like, yeah, you probably saw me somewhere. And then I look like my father, you know, alhamdulillah. And they'd say, are you Dr. Latif's son? And I'd say, yes. And every one of them had a story about how my father gave medicine to their mothers when they didn't have any insurance, or, you know, didn't charge them for certain things for the same reasons, whatever else it was. And I would hear doctors talking when I was growing up because I was surrounded by them constantly. And even now I go to hospitals a lot, given just the work that I do, but within a different frame. And there would be times when I would hear people say certain things and I couldn't fundamentally understand it. You know, like I'd be in my dad's office and I probably should not have been listening to what was being said. But I'm a little kid, I'm listening anyway. And they're saying things like, you just had a mild heart attack. It's not that big a deal. And in my head, I'm like, why would any kind of heart attack not be a big deal? It's a heart attack. It's not so serious. Don't worry about it. And it's like your heart just stopped working the way that it was supposed to, even for a little bit of time. That's not a small thing, you see? And then what we were being directed back to is you can get to a state of normalcy through this medicine or through this that'll get you back to what was creating the stress in the begin with. Versus somebody sitting somebody down and being like, hey man, maybe that dollar is not so important that you are literally killing your body. Or maybe that gallon of oil that you drink every time you go to an Indian buffet, it's not worth it. Maybe you should start jogging a little bit or exercising. You don't have to be the strongest person in the world, but go for a walk once in a while. The language in and of itself is not one that's actually emphasizing a care that says things in a spectrum that is of its real importance. A mild heart attack is still a heart attack, man. Why would you want to just call it something mild? And in relation to what is the most severe, the language in and of itself, you all know because you have family members, that they just don't take it seriously then at the end of the day. Our tradition does not mince words. Our Prophet ﷺ consistently tells us, the Quran consistently tells us, your heart is important. If you don't learn how it works and functions, you're going to hear all kinds of things. They're going to make you feel guilty. I don't want you to feel guilty. May Allah grant you ease. There's a verse in Surah Al-Isra where Allah Azza wa Jal, He says, Inna sam'a wal basara wal fu'ada, right? Indeed, your hearing, your seeing, your fu'ad, your hearts, all of those things are things that you are going to be responsible for. You're going to be questioned about. Think about how it relates to the heart now. The hearing usually precedes seeing when it talks about the heart in the Quran, because it's really hard to not hear things. You can close your eyes, you can lower your gaze as the command is there, but if you are sitting and you are hearing somebody yell and scream, somebody curse, somebody be racist, it's hard to just stick your hands over your ears and just block out whatever it is that's being consumed, right? Versus you literally can just go like this, you know, and you don't see it. I just messed up my contact lens. Do you understand? It becomes a channel now back to your spiritual heart, what you're hearing. And if there's not an awareness of how it works and how it functions, it doesn't mean that it's still not doing what it was intended to do. You don't know how your stomach works. That's why you put garbage into your body all the time, right? You don't really know how everything works in your body, and your self-care is indicative of that, right? May Allah make us those who take care of ourselves. It still just goes. It still just does, doesn't it? So if you're not aware of how this works, and then you don't see how shaitan enters into it, الَّذِي يُوَسْوِسُ فِي صُدُورِ النَّاسِ, he can whisper into your heart, but he doesn't know your thoughts. Shaitan is not a mind reader. The interjection of waswasa now into a heart that is not engaged is going to make it easier to be susceptible to it. And to make now negative cognitive bias something that becomes that much more resonant in how it is that we formulate core beliefs. So every time those words are heard as if they sound like they make sense, but they fundamentally do not. You are not a bad person if you do not cook food for your husband. Don't marry somebody who's going to make you feel that way. But you have to think about, what did I hear? And how did it then translate itself into something that gave abode within me, rooted in this most precious part of me? You understand? In the same way, those patients would come to my dad, and they'd sit down, and they'd go through stress tests and EKGs and all other kinds of stuff, trying to figure out now at the aftermath and consequence of it. You don't want to be the person who, when the world is turned upside down and everything's in a frenzy, that's the only catalyst to start thinking about it. If it becomes the catalyst, then take the good from the difficulty and say, I got to learn how this inner part of me actually functions. The same way my dad would sit down with someone and say, if you do not stop this, you are going to die. And even then, you can't imagine how many people still went and did whatever they felt like. Do you see what I mean? So it's a part of you. It doesn't need you to understand it in order for it to exist. But it's to your benefit if you fundamentally get what it is that it does, how it functions, and that there's a lot of questions that you're not going to have answered just through the physiological aspects of it. Because you could go to a doctor, you could ask my dad, right? Why, how does the heart pump blood and how does it put... But if you say, why is it the thing that the blood is being pumped to and from to begin with? Why isn't it the brain? Why was it created in this way where it kind of goes in and out and in and out and in and out? There's going to be so many questions that fundamentally, when you talk to doctors, you can ask some of them. I grew up, maybe not the two that are here, right? They're, probably able to answer most of these questions. But I grew up with a lot of doctors. And if I was to ask them questions about why does this medicine actually do this thing? Like, I don't know. I don't know why it does this. It just does. What our tradition offers to us, though, is actual insight into the spiritual aspects of these things, the metaphysical that then bear their impact on the physical. When you are sad, does your body feel good? No. When you're in a state of grief, right? One of my friends, his father passed away yesterday. May Allah grant him peace. And he is sitting in an airplane on the other side of the world that's not taking off. And he missed his father's janazah. And he texted me after a friend of mine told me late last night, hey, Sayyid's father passed away and he's not going to be able to make it. My friend, he texted me a little while ago and he said that, I'm so grateful that you all were able to be there and fulfill those responsibilities. What do you think he's feeling sitting in that chair on that airplane? And what do you think it's doing to his body, his physical body? Muraqabah isn't about you don't feel the pain. Muraqabah is about when the pain comes, you don't do something stupid to numb it. You don't get thrown into a frenzy that you need immediate kind of cessation of something or gratification. That you're still in a state where your emotional recovery allows for you to have wakefulness in your decision making. Muraqabah is the thing that in the aftermath of stupid decisions, you're still mindful of the fact that Allah's mercy exists. The shaitan is not trying to get into your head in the sense that he thinks your thoughts, but the act that you act upon to make it a means to get you to believe that you can no longer have a relationship with the divine. And muraqabah is that guard, right? I saw somebody wrote this on Instagram the other day. I don't know who it was and whether it was like a popular post or not. But he said everybody hates the warrior. Nobody likes the warrior until the castle needs to be protected. If you only start to pay attention to the heart after things have been laid siege to, that's going to be a problem. And Abu Hurairah radiallahu anh, he says that the heart is the king and the limbs are the soldiers. And when the king is in control, the limbs are going to fall into place. But when it's not, they're just going to be helter-skelter. You see? And muraqabah is the thing that allows for you to remember Allah's love. It's the thing that allows for you to be conscious of Allah's presence in a way that's still empowering, not in a way that's deflating and pushing you down. Does that make sense? Why don't we start reading from the chapter? Can somebody start from the first, "You must, O my brothers"? Who wants to read? Anybody? Do we have it pulled up? Yeah, go ahead.
You must, O my brothers, be mindful of God in all your movements in times of stillness, at every moment, with every blink of the eye, with every thought, wish, or any other state. Feel his nearness to you, know that he looks and is aware of you, that nothing you conceal is hidden from him. Nothing that weighs so much as an atom is hidden from your Lord, whether on earth or in heaven. When you speak aloud, he knows your secret thought and that which is even more hidden. He is with you wherever you are, with his knowledge, awareness, and power. If you are of the righteous, he will guide, assist, and protect you.
It's not meant to be a description that has you now walk with trepidation, but to be in a place that has you wakeful of the fact that you have a God that's not just watching you, but watching over you. And that regardless of where you go, that Allah is aware of where you are. But its first step is not meant to be something that has you walking on eggshells. It's meant to give you empowerment. This won't work if you also don't think in relation to what the heart's purpose is, who God is to you fundamentally. and understanding Allah through His words. Right? He is Ar-Raqib. It has the same root as Muraqabah. So Allah is ever watchful, ever aware, ever vigilant over us. If you believe in a God that's an angry old man in the sky looking for a reason to punish you, then that's the God you believe in. If you fundamentally also don't know who Allah is to you, it doesn't mean that you haven't paradoxically made a decision, because when you don't make a choice, you've essentially chosen. That's the paradox. There's the unconscious conceptualization of the divine that can have this paragraph be something that others who spoke on Allah's behalf that should not have been formulated for you an ideal that was anything other than ideal, that you are bad if you don't cook for your husband. It can create this construct of a core belief that's negative. It's not empowering. Or you look at the Quran in its most manifest form, and you see the Prophet ﷺ, who the hadith says, his wife says, he sewed his own clothes. He did chores in the house, right? It's not like he did it. Do you know what I mean? This is what he did. This paragraph is going to only yield a vigilance that's productive, not an anxiety-inducing vigilance, but a vigilance that gives me strength if the formula understands that you also can only determine yourself who Allah is to you. Do you believe in a God that is the most merciful of those who show mercy? A God that believes in you more than you believe in yourself. A God that's looking for a reason to accept you and not push you away. The other part to this that you'd have to reflect on is, what are the things that I actually am subservient to? What are the things that I actually worship? It's not an easy question. But it becomes important. Do I worship people's approval? Do I worship wealth? Do I worship physical beauty? Am I subservient to certain things that are not healthy for me by any means, but it's still something nonetheless that I am in submission to? All of these things are going to have gaps in what they can provide. They fundamentally are not going to be able to give to you what Allah gives to you. But in knowing who Allah is, you got to also think, what have I outsourced certain parts of this to other parts of creation other than to Allah alone? Because you can believe that Allah is Al-Khaliq, that He is the creator of all things. It doesn't mean that you believe that He is Ar-Rahman, that He is the most merciful. You can believe that Allah is Al-Khaliq, that He created you, but it doesn't mean that you believe that He is Ar-Raqib, that He is ever watchful, that He is Al-Latif, that He is the most gentle. Do you get what I'm saying? I want you to take a minute now, just like how we did before when we were talking about the heart. And I want you to think about this from the standpoint individually within yourself. Who is Allah to you? And as you're thinking about who Allah is to you, I want you to think about who it is that you would ideally want Allah to be to you. And where does the disconnect come in? So just take a minute and think to yourself, who is Allah to you? Who would you ideally want Allah to be to you? Okay. So what I'd like you to do now is just turn to the person again next to you. In this first paragraph, how do you read it so that it's telling you something that's of benefit to you? Like, why is your awareness of the divine something that's good for you? You see what I mean? As opposed to something that could be inhibiting, where is it something that could be of benefit? Like, this is a spiritual journey that the text is taking us on, an individual heart. So when he says, you must be aware of the divine at all parts, like, why? Why do you think that's something that's important? And let yourself be real vulnerable to it. You know what I mean? Not the answers you feel like you're supposed to give. It's not a Sunday school class, right? But where do you think it brings benefit back to the individual? Does that make sense? Okay, why don't we talk a little bit amongst ourselves? Like, how does this bring benefit to me, this kind of mindset? Why is he advising us of this? And we'll come back and discuss. Just the first paragraph.
A lot of times when people say, you know, love God, so because of what you do, you know, don't do this, don't do that, you know, I love watching you, and all of that things you do. But that's the wrong way to look at it. Because wherever you are, whatever it is that you do, and everything that Allah will do, he knows everything that you are doing.
Right? A lot goes into that, but like, I want my God to just get away. It's comforting to know that my God is always right. And same like concept, you know. And then it also shifts the responsibility. Whereas sorry, it's not as guiding. Putting myself in right? So it's this is what I told right now. I shut my
Okay. Yeah, you get 30 seconds. Go. Yeah, go for it. No, it's okay. Go for it.
Whichever one not looking at your eyes on anybody.
It's the three answers, right? Yes, not right now, or I have something better. Right? No, okay, so there's this saying that, like, whenever you pick a up, there's only three answers. There's never no. That says not right now, there's something
Okay.
I hadn't heard of it,
So
I'm doing it.
what do we think? Why is this important to do? Why is he advising us in this way? What did you talk about? Yeah.
It just brings comfort in every situation, that you feel like that Allah is there all the time, thinking about Him all the time, and it's taking care of me all the time. Whatever happens, whether it's good or bad, that brings comfort somehow. It feels like, you know, like as a child, like his mom is always taking care, and he's just like so comfortable. Whenever mom is not there, then, you know, that feels anxious. So it brings just comfort, just being aware all the time. But I think it needs effort also to be aware all the time about that. It's not that easy as well.
Okay, great. What else? What do we talk about? Yeah.
We talked about how, you know, when you're thinking of Allah as the most merciful, as this ultimate guide and protector and all these positive things, then that's exactly what you want by you at all times, right? That is a comfort. And also, when you think about it that way, that He's always there and He is always watching, it kind of shifts the responsibility onto you. Are you being vigilant? If God is guiding me, am I listening? If God is protecting me, am I putting myself in danger? And so there's like that positive to it as well.
Great. Other thoughts? This is an important thing, you know? You don't want to be in a place where you're intimidated in your relationship with the divine in the way that it actually becomes something that diminishes growth. And you don't want to speak only when you have the right thing to say, quote unquote, or your silence is out of avoidance of the wrong thing. But fundamentally, this point of awareness and consciousness is going to be critical in transforming just how it is that you see the whole world around you, right? So you don't want to be scared to have that conversation with yourself. Why is this important? Why is it important to have an awareness of God? Yeah.
Well, I think in our case, right, one of the things we discussed is it creates this mindfulness for you to actually have a second thought before you actually undertake an action. Because then, if you're going to do something wrong, you know that, okay, Allah is with me, Allah is aware of what I want to do. So why should I do something when I'm very much aware that what I want to do is wrong, right? And at the same time, when you want to do things just for the pleasure of doing it, knowing that Allah actually is within knowledge, right? You could actually look for ways of doing those things, achieving the same purpose while still doing it to earn the pleasure of Allah. So it allows you to actually think twice before you actually execute any endeavor.
Yeah, right. If you are in a place where you have awareness of God, you also then have the prerequisite state of awareness. You see? So in order for you to have consciousness of Allah, you first have to be exerting consciousness in your mode of engagement of the world. And it allows for now second thoughts, tertiary thoughts, to be able to place yourself in check, where the majority of existence is done in an absence of focus, on default settings, instinctively, right? Ihsan, which is essentially, in its definition, what the whole point of muraqabah is, أن تعبد الله كأنك تراه that you worship God as if you can see Him, for although you cannot see Him, He sees you, right? This is the idea of just having this awareness that Allah sees me, right? And even though I can't see Him, I know that He sees me, right? You're living in this way where it taps into what makes you innately human, which is that you have the ability to have consciousness and wakefulness. The Prophet ﷺ, even when they described his sleep, he would say, "Tanama anaya wa la yanama qalbi," that my eyes they sleep, but my heart does not sleep. His body is in a physical state of slumber, but his heart is in an ever increasing state of wakefulness, right? It's always awake. You see? And it's not meant to be exhausting because it's awake. If anything, it becomes a source of comfort. And it's not in this constant mode, right? Imam Razi, rahimahullah, he basically breaks down our kind of purpose in this life to be in two frames, which is, he says, ibadat al-khaliq, that you do the worship of the Creator, wa khidmat al-khalq, and you do service of the creation. But you can't do those things without understanding hadith where people said, I'm just going to fast every day, and I'm just going to pray, and not sleep. And the Prophet says, I sleep, I'm married, I don't fast every day, right? Basically saying, like, you think you got this better than I do? No, like, you take time for yourself, you do things for yourself. But here, that wakefulness and awareness is all of these things that we're saying, and all the things that you want to say, but you are scared to say them. You have to stop being scared. You can't love fully if you are afraid, right? If I'm fearful of my wife, then I'm not doing things out of love for her. I'm doing it because I'm afraid of her. That's not the same thing, right? If you came into my house and I was cleaning and cooking, and you said, Khalid, mashallah, how good are you as a husband? I was like, I'm petrified of my wife. Versus you came in and I'm doing whatever I'm doing, and you don't even have to ask me, you can just tell that I love her. Do you see? They're two totally different frames. Kicking in consciousness allows for then to narrow it to a place of what is that consciousness rooted in. Muraqabah is not just mindfulness, it's mindfulness rooted in an ethical imperative. It's rooted in a sense of ethics that's not a moral relativism, but what our tradition teaches us of morals and values and ethics. Right? Why am I doing like the things that I'm doing? Why don't I smile more at people? You know what I mean? Right? You feel Allah's presence, you're gonna smile at people, right? You feel Allah's presence, you're not gonna let somebody make dumb racist jokes. You feel Allah's presence, it is a mechanism to be able to combat inequity, to also build what is beneficial. You see? You can land there on different routes too. It's not the only thing, so to speak. But when you can harness it, it can yield so much. Why are we focused on this so much? If it's not important to you, then you're not going to do what you need to make it happen. You understand? I can sit here and tell you why I get up to pray in the morning. That's not going to be what's going to get you to get up to pray in the morning. You have to tell yourself it's important to you to pray in the morning. I can say to you, you should fast. The days are shorter. Get it done. You literally can experience the benefits of fasting in Ramadan. But it has to be important enough to you. And it's not that there aren't things that you can see people that they're worth fighting over, right? The number of times I sit with people, rightfully quite often, I'm not saying it's a problem, who they go head to head with family that for all kinds of racist, biased reasons are not letting their kids marry the people that they want them to, right? May Allah protect us from it. Racism is racism. Regardless of what you call it, it's still racism. Right? And if your discrimination is rooted in racism, well, that's even more problematic. But you see, in your own self? Why do some of you kill yourself sitting in libraries till the late hours of the night? Why do some of you do all kinds of things to make yourself suitable for a companion? There's a Bengali guy that used to come here. He was marrying this German girl, and I kid you not, I saw this brother walking around with like 3 intro to German textbooks. He's trying to speak German with a Bengali accent, right? He loves her. It's getting done what he wants to get done. He's got something that's important to him. This is why you do these things. I'm not saying they're bad, but principally, if you can do it in pursuit of that, you have to want to make this muraqabah, muhasabah, taqwa. All of these things have to be that important to you, and you will make them important to you based off of first if you even begin to think about them. If you never think about it, how is it going to be important? Or are you going to know its importance? Do you see? Does that make sense? Let's read the next paragraph where he tells us now some practical things. Can somebody read it? Have modesty. Hi, you want to keep reading? You want to read?
Sure.
Oh, you're great. Go ahead.
Have modesty before your Lord as you should. Make sure that he never sees you in a situation which he has forbidden you, and never misses you where he has commanded you to be. Worship him as if you saw him, for even if you do not see him, he sees you. Whenever you notice in your soul any laziness in his worship or inclination to disobedience, remind it that God hears and sees you and knows your secrets and secret conversation. If this reminding does not benefit it because of the inadequacy of its knowledge of the majesty of God, remind it of the 2 noble angels who record good and evil deeds, and recite to it, when the 2 receivers receive, sitting on the right and on the left, he utters no word, but there is with him a watcher ready. If this reminding does not influence it, remind it of the proximity of death, that it is the nearest of all hidden and weighted things. Frighten it of its sudden pouncing, whereby if it does come when it is in an unsatisfactory state, it will end up in endless perdition. If this threat is of no use, remind it of the immense reward which God has promised those who obey him, and the painful torment with which he has threatened those who disobey him. Say to it, O soul, after death there will be no opportunity to repent, and there will be, after this life, only the garden or the fire. Choose, if you will, obedience, the consequence of which is triumph, contentment, immortality in vast gardens, and looking at the face of God, the generous, the beneficent, or else all disobedience, the consequence of which is degradation, humiliation, mockery, deprivation, and imprisonment between layers of fire. Endeavor to cure your soul with such reminders when it neglects obedience and inclines to rebellion, for they are useful medicines for the heart's diseases.
Okay, what is he saying here? How do we understand this in this kind of spiritual roadmap? You know, it's a journey that we're undertaking. So what's he telling you? What do you take from it? Yeah.
Be accountable for what we used to do.
Yeah, you'll be accountable for what you would do. But what is this a list of that he's writing out to us?
Practical ways to put the mind in check.
Yeah, so you're going to get in check, right? All the things that you just said. You get exhausted, you get tired. Somebody stills in your head something that is not tangible. You cannot constantly be on, you know, and always in service of people and doing these things. You're going to burn out. You're going to get exhausted, you know. So when the exhaustion sets in, right, the laziness sets in, the tiredness sets in, there's certain things that you can take off the table, but certain things you can't. The haram is haram. It's haram. That's it. The fard is fard. You got to do the fard. But here now is an opportunity to start to think about self-talk. He's giving, in his own words, ways that if you have this challenge, then try this. It didn't work, then try this. Didn't work, then do this. And he goes through like 10 of these things, which means people have a lot of times when things just don't work out. Do you get what I mean? It's not that all of a sudden you're going to always be running up and down that, yeah, I'm excited to like throw cold water in my face on a 10-degree day in the morning and pray at 3 a.m. and all this kind of stuff. Sometimes you're just exhausted. You can be sick. You can be tired. You can be stressed. You can be fighting with people. You are not just in a vacuum. And these are advices. The definition in the first sentence is the definition of haya, right? It's not what we understand modesty to be, that is limited to clothing or things to that extent. But the definition of haya is that you are present in the gatherings where the divine would want to see you, and you are not in spaces where Allah would not want for you to be seen. That's pretty much what it is. And what he's saying is, you practice haya. These ethics and values that we are taught are things that you can make verbs, right? So compassion is not something that I aspire to have as a value kind of grammatically as a noun, the way I have a plant next to me, right? Or a table that is actual thing, but it's something that I do, right? I do compassion, right? I do haya. So in order for us to do that, you gotta know the places that God wouldn't want you to be. And also where are the spaces that God would want you to be seen. And these are not places necessarily that are just rooted also in obligation and prohibition. That is it, but beyond that, right? The child of Adam comes to Allah on the day of judgment. O son of Adam, you did not visit me when I was sick. You did not visit me. You did not feed me when I was hungry, right? You did not give me drink when I was thirsty. You know, Ya Allah, you are Rabbul Alameen. How can I what are you talking about? Is what he says, right? This doesn't make sense. And he says, my servant was sick and you did not visit him. Had you visited him, then you would have found me there. My friend's father passed away yesterday, and I found out. I sent a message to some WhatsApp groups that I'm on, that some of you are on. I said to people, you want to come to the janazah with me? Come to the janazah with me. Some people asked me after the fact, very, very vulnerably, like, I've never been to a janazah before, right? I've never been to a funeral before. Do people go to funerals of people that they don't know? And I was like, yeah, in our tradition, you don't have to know the sick to visit the sick. You don't have to know the deceased to pray over their body. But my intention of inviting somebody to it is just that they can now create an opportunity to have a relationship with some of these practices that have a familiarity to revive some of what is recommended to us in the Sunnah, that you are in a place where you are actually going simply because that person has a right over you. And the hadith says there's ajr in it for you, right? That you get a reward equivalent to the Mount of Uhud for just praying in the janazah. Do you see? And if you go all the way to the burial, then you get like another reward equivalent to that. But do you get what I'm saying? Does that make sense? And so the opportunity for some of this is for us to think this out, right? We won't know these things until we know them. And when you know them, it doesn't mean you drop everything now to go to a funeral that you fundamentally can't go to, but with wakefulness. You say, hey, this is something that actually has benefit for the deceased as well as for me. Right? Like, I can go to the soup kitchen and feed people when everybody else is asleep. The Prophet ﷺ makes dua, asking Allah to bless his ummah in the early mornings. Anybody who is like crazy successful, they're waking up early in the day, not late in the day. Starting their days at 3, 4, 5 o'clock in the morning. And then they get more accomplished by like 9 a.m., 10 a.m. than most people do in the entirety of the day. The Prophet ﷺ teaches us that the sleep that's after Fajr is a sleep that has no barakah in it. And it's not about anything judgmental or non-judgmental. I don't know why. I'm not the creator of sleep. But you start to learn, like, what are the things that Allah wants me to be doing? What are the things that I should not be kind of in the midst of, right? This is what haya is. And then he says that if you are in this place, when you notice that you can't keep up with it, this is where you start now to talk to your soul, right? That you start to engage in a self-talk. Self-talk is so, so important. Do you know what I mean? You are not any one of your thoughts. The whispers come in, oh man, we're just gonna, get up, in just 5 more minutes, 10 more minutes, right? I gotta do this, I gotta do that. You just learn about yourself through yourself. This woman called me the other day and she said, my kids, I'm trying to get them to learn about the importance of prayer. They're 2 and 4 years old. And she said when they're playing and I say, come pray, they don't want to come and pray. And I said, well, they're babies, right? They're 2 and 4. And she said, well, how do we get this? And I said, look, fundamentally, adults are not any different. So the hadith says that when the meal is served, there's no prayer. It doesn't mean that you don't pray Maghrib because, iftar came and you got to eat first because the hadith says that you don't pray. That's not what the hadith says. It's not what it means. What it's saying is you created the distraction for you. So if you decide to put something on the stove and turn the timer on and it's going to go off in 3 minutes, and then in the midst of the 4th rak'ah of your prayer, it's beeping like crazy, and then it's bubbling over, and then you jump out after the salam to go and turn it off, you created the distraction. Right? So don't do that. So the kid is just being a kid. If the kid has the toy, you gave him the toy in the first place. Then you get mad at him for playing with the toy the way the kid plays, and then go into this all kinds of head craziness of my 4-year-old does not want to come and stand with me during they're 4 years old, man. What are you talking about? If that 4-year-old dropped that toy to go run to the call of the adhan, or the 2-year-old did, that would be, you'd be like, what is it? A little jinn baby in my house? What is going on here? But do you see what I mean? So you got to take the time to learn the things, and then they become applicable, and then you start talking to yourself. Right? You don't have these kind of obscure understandings of what success looks like. It's subjective. You didn't wake up to pray Fajr today? Try your best to wake up for it tomorrow. You're not in a competition with anybody else. It's just who you are today is not afraid to meet the person you can be tomorrow. And then he goes into this in a lot of different ways, right? So you remind yourself that Allah hears and sees you, that these are things that they're ever present, elements to it. The angels are on your shoulders, right? Literally, what our tradition teaches us, on each one of our shoulders, there is an angel writing things down. Inna alaykum lahafidhin, the verse says, that there are 2 guardians upon your shoulders. Kiraman katibin, elevated in writing, right? And then it goes through the remainder of this list. You want to extrapolate from his language principles of to-dos for you. They get you back in control. The body is tired, the heart is still awake, right? You are not any one of your thoughts because somebody's got to be thinking those thoughts. Just like you're not any one of your feelings, because then who's feeling the feelings at the end of the day? Do you see? Okay, so there's 2 paragraphs left here. What I want to do, just in the interest of time, I know we started late. We prayed Isha before, so if people haven't prayed Isha yet, I know there's a bunch of you that weren't here at that time. You can make another Jama'ah for Isha, inshallah. Go home between this week and next week. Next week we're going to have a mindfulness expert who I teach a class with here at the university, as well as one of our formal staff psychologists, Dr. Hala Alian, who's really amazing. They're going to come to the halaqah and they're going to help with a mindfulness writing workshop. That's just a different way of doing muraqabah. Does that make sense? So you should come because it'll help in the practice of it. What I'd like for you to do is go home and do a couple of things. One, like just think about fundamentally where and how you create spaces of muraqabah, like deliberate exercise. Like literally you would sit on the ground and you're just engaged in meditation. Your muraqabah can be on anything, right? Like you can do meditative practice on whatever fundamentally you want to, but it's an exercise that's allowing for you to push the distractive thoughts out of your head, and you're just focused now on building attentiveness. So muraqabah on, what would your funeral look like, right? If I had you all right now close your eyes and walk you through a meditation, and I would say, close your eyes and tell me, like it's the day of your funeral, who is there, who is not there? Questions that would allow for you to kind of walk through it. Do you know what I mean? And you're engaged in this practice within yourself, vigilance, like inward reflection, contemplation. I want you to think about, more importantly though, like secondly, what's really going on if you were to assess the state of your heart right now and the relationship to it? You cannot do this if you self-deprecate. So you have to promise yourself more than me that you are not going to engage in self-deprecation. I'm saying it to you, somebody who loves you. Part of this is going to be thinking about what brings healthiness to your heart. There is a paradox in our spirituality that a soft heart is a strong heart, and a hard heart is a weak heart. What are the things that are making your heart soft, and what are the things that are making your heart weak? You can go online and Google, right? How to soften your heart according to the Quran. How to soften your heart according to the Hadith. They're not things that are like, become a hafiz. But you're going to read things that tell you to exert in acts of kindness. Exert yourself in acts of gentleness, right? Al-jazaa al-ihsani il-ihsan, that is a reward for beauty, anything other than beauty, that it has its perpetual, self-perpetuating nature. You put beauty in the world, it just creates beauty and it gives it back to you. He's going to talk to you about things that are ritualistic, doing dhikr, fasting, prayer, charity, hajj, umrah. He's going to talk about both forgiveness and seeking forgiveness, so being forgiving as well as asking for forgiveness. There's a lot of different things that'll come up. If you don't know the practice, then you're not going to be able to engage in it, right? And it has to be important enough for you. So how do I create a soft heart? How do I engage in deliberate practice that softens my heart regularly? It doesn't have to be hours at a time in a day, but it's like 5 minutes, 6 minutes. Do you know what I mean? What are the signs that like something's not going okay? Do you know? These can be heavy conversations. So if you need someone to talk to, let me know. I'm happy to listen. I can connect you to our staff psychologists if you're a student. If you're not a student, we can refer you to counselors, therapists. It doesn't mean that you are a bad person, but things that are symptomatic of things that might not have been purposely put in by us, but they still exist in our hearts. You can start to see by like what causes me irritation, what causes me anger, hostility, aggressiveness, these different kinds of things. What creates calmness within me, gentleness, resilience, patience. It's not all just in a negative frame. What allows for me to practice gratitude. Do you see what I'm saying? And so those are the things between this week and next week. Be important if you can start to just sit and think about it. It's a practical text. it's not that there's not a gain from just hearing it, but you got to do it too. Do you know? And you have to make time. Your heart has to be important enough that you actually make time to do it. And I can almost guarantee to you that shaitan is going to get in your head and tell you you don't have the time, or there's no point to it, that nothing you've tried have ever worked before. You're going to always have this pain inside of you. Anxiety is just going to be a forever part of your life, right? All kinds of things are going to come up. There are literally people who have seen shaitan in physical form, right? Abu Hurairah radiallahu anh, he sees shaitan. It's in the hadith. This is where we learn about the importance of the Ayatul Kursi, right? He sees shaitan. There's others who tell us stories also about this. Shaitan does not want for you to have that success, so he's going to whisper to you where you're most vulnerable. You got to just block it all out and just be in a place where you're like, you know what? I don't know what's going to happen at the end of this. Even if at the end result is 3 weeks from now, I'm going to go back and say, Khalid, you are so stupid, man, which is fine. I would love for you to tell me that, but only if you actually try what I'm saying. And if you didn't try it because internally you already told yourself there's no point, then you're helping shaitan have victory over you. Do you get what I mean? So all I'm saying is 5 minutes, you just sit, find a quiet space that you can contemplate, reflect in, do the act of muraqabah. You get to a place where you start to think and contemplate on these different things. Number 2, you just go and do some research on your own, right? Bring it back to us. What are things that soften the heart? What are things that harden the heart? And even if you don't go online, just think about yourself, right? What are things that make you feel really hard inside versus things that kind of soften you, you know? We had, like in the first weeks of the halaqah, Aya showed us a picture of her nephew, right? He's a cute kid named Muhammad, right? Yeah, what a great guess. You know, we all saw Muhammad's picture, and those of us who saw it, we felt really nice. We don't know this kid. We're not holding him in our hand. You see a baby, it's a thing of beauty. It brings you a certain ease, you know, right? That's what should happen. So how do I know signs within myself that things that are inherently good, I don't have attraction towards them? You see? And I'm in a place where I feel like at times even repelled by certain things. Do you get what I'm saying? Does that make sense? So that's the third part, like looking inwardly and kind of having introspection around it.
We hope you enjoyed our podcast. If you're inspired by the work that we're doing at the IC and want to help keep it going, subscribe to our podcasts, follow us on social media, donate to help support us at ICNYU.org, and most importantly, keep us in your continued du'as. Until next time, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum.